This is the best SUV ever, the 1993 Isuzu Trooper. This is the Trooper S. It is a 3.2 liter 6-cylinder single overhead cam, 16-inch tires, and even with the base model, the S, it has 4-wheel drive. It has heated mirrors, electric folding mirrors. It has 3 metal skid plates protecting the undercarriage. The stock wheels are 16-inch, 245, 70, 16. It has the largest carrying cargo capacity inside than any other SUV at that time. It could easily sleep 2 adults with the rear passenger seats folded up or removed, as some people have done. Its off-road capability is established. It's not a rock climber, but forest roads, BLM, there's no problem with this vehicle. Sits high off the road, gives you a good view of traffic and terrain. It has a 21-gallon fuel tank. And the EPA estimates were, back then, 18 to 19 highway, 15 to 16 city. So in terms of fuel economy, it eclipses the vehicles that are on the market today, like the Jeep, which is a known gas guzzler. This is a very large and roomy cargo area, which could easily sleep 2 adults and maybe even squeeze in a little child. As you can see, the passenger seats fold up neatly above that area, and it has the space probably for someone up to 5 feet 9 inches tall. And even sleeping in the vehicle, there's plenty of room to stow cargo and other equipment that might be needed for the off-road adventure. And in the front, again, a very roomy cabin, comfortable seats. And since I've kept these seats covered for the last 26 years, they are basically like new. Anyone wishing to upgrade his or her Isuzu Trooper, this would be a good scavenger vehicle, because basically everything is like new and would fit very well into later models of the Trooper. Again, the stock Trooper had the motorized outside mirrors. The window in the rear of the vehicle in the cargo area is heated when needed. The mirrors adjust electronically and fold in electronically. It also has cruise control. And as you can see here on the instrument panel, all of the gauges work, by the way. This vehicle's doing well at over 100, almost 119,000 miles. The radio is the only thing that's been replaced on the vehicle, and it wasn't due to malfunction. It was due to a 5-finger discount by someone when I was at work one day. So this is a cheap replacement that I put in, and even that has sufficed for the last 10-15 years. Gear shifts, console, the lining almost in mint condition, so if someone needed to replace a Trooper lining, again, this would be the good scavenger vehicle to do that with. There's a light there in the rear by the cargo door. There's also a lamp here, all of which in good working condition. And has just been a hard worker and wonderful performer over the 26 years that I've had this vehicle. Isuzu made a big mistake in stopping production of the Trooper in the United States. One which I'm sure that they regret. Because if they could produce a vehicle this good at that time, just think what the capability of an Isuzu Trooper would be today. I first became interested in the Trooper when my military unit was doing a mission to support a civil engineering unit in Ecuador in 1993. And the vehicles that we were supplied to use were these little 2-door stick shift white vehicles that had a passenger capacity of 2, driver and passenger, and a tiny cargo space. Well, I can tell you, the Ecuadorians beat those vehicles up. They took them over mountains, they took them down into creek beds, they carried a lot of heavy equipment in these vehicles, and these vehicles still performed. So I was impressed by the Isuzu Trooper. And I said to myself, when I get home, I'll look into it. Well, by the time I got home and looked into it, at least on the American market, that particular model, that 2-door stick shift vehicle that carried us all over Ecuador, was no longer available. The market had moved to the Trooper 2, which was still a boxy type of vehicle, but it was no longer being produced because there was a big model year change in 1992 and a half, so that by the time I looked into Trooper, the Trooper 1993, which looks like this, became available. This is what I purchased. I prefer that boxy, rugged look, which seems to appeal to off-road type people, but I decided to try this, and I've never had a regret of purchasing this vehicle. Now, as you look at it, or as you have seen, There is standard wear and tear for a vehicle that's been on the road for and off-road a lot that you'd expect, like the paint job. Well, the paint job is courtesy of this vehicle being in the sun in California and Nevada. And I think that that is expected. And since this is my sort of everyday driver, cargo carrier, off-road fun vehicle, I have not decided to invest in a new paint job. As to engine wear, the only thing that I've replaced over 26 years is a radiator. But everything else looks good. Both differentials are intact, do not leak, four-wheel drive works, gear shifting is smooth. And I like the fact that Isuzu on this standard model put 3 metal plates. You can sort of see them in this view. 3 metal skid plates there. And even at the bottom of the doors, that even though it's painted, that area is attached to the frame and serves as a rock rail. So again, for a baseline vehicle, Isuzu was ahead of its time in producing the Trooper. And again, it's too bad that they decided to get out of the market. The shocks and springs on this Trooper have lasted the test of time. Those are the original. Well, I'm not sure about the shocks. It's just that everything that I've had for maintenance has been so long ago, or the intervals have been so long, that I forget what they are. So I know the springs and suspensions and stabilization bars and tie rods and all that stuff, they've never been changed out. And on city streets, this Trooper just glides along. No vibrations, no problem, smooth ride. As you all know by now, the Isuzu Trooper has been off the American market since 2002. This was due to a scathing report by the Consumer Reports magazine in 1995, saying that the Isuzu Trooper was an unsafe vehicle and not to buy it. At that time, the sales of the Isuzu Trooper were skyrocketing, and it threatened to take over the SUV market. The Isuzu Trooper report was also seen on 60 Minutes, emphasizing the fact that on their testing, in which they tested not only the Trooper but other vehicles, there was a significant problem with rollover potential when doing avoidance maneuvering around cones at a high speed.
Immediately following the Consumer Reports press release in August, American Isuzu Motors, in concert with Isuzu Japan, undertook a comprehensive investigation of all the handling and stability testing conducted on the current model Trooper. Isuzu also commissioned a third-party team of independent engineers to retest the Trooper and review the Consumers Union's findings. Why all of this testing and research? To fully understand the situation and determine what action should be taken. During the development of the Trooper, Isuzu rigorously and extensively tested the vehicle at Isuzu's proving grounds in Fujisawa and Hokkaido, Japan. The following footage demonstrates some of the tests conducted on the 95 and 96 Trooper. In one of the tests, the Trooper was put through multiple runs on a high-speed slalom course at 70 miles per hour. Although there is some body lean, which is to be expected with this kind of maneuver, the Trooper handles it capably. Also at 70 miles per hour, the Trooper is seen successfully handling a severe lane change test. Next, the Trooper was subjected to slalom tests at speeds of 45 miles per hour. Again, the trooper's handling is stable and responsive. Finally, the trooper is seen managing a slalom course at 50 miles per hour. The trooper was also tested on rough road conditions, which are meant to evaluate the handling aspects of the trooper in an off-road situation. Although Isuzu had already performed exhaustive tests on the trooper in Japan, they commissioned additional testing by independent experts. Car Engineering, a company specializing in automotive testing and evaluation, put the trooper through its own testing regimen. Like Isuzu's tests, many of the tests performed by Car Engineering are based on scientific and generally accepted test protocols, developed by engineering organizations like the International Organization for Standardization and the Society of Automotive Engineers. These tests are used by automotive engineers around the world to evaluate the handling capabilities and performance limits of vehicles. One such test is the high-speed slalom, which was conducted on the trooper as seen here at 50 miles per hour. The severe lane change at speeds of 55 miles per hour. Finally, Car Engineering reviewed the videotape supplied by the Consumers Union to better understand their test and the reasons for their results. The first analysis examined the steering input of all the vehicles tested. By freeze-framing the path of each vehicle as it enters the course and then recreating the angle of the wheels, the engineers can determine the degree of driver input on the steering wheel of the vehicle. In other words, how much the steering wheel is turned to affect the angle of the wheels. By freeze-framing the trooper as it enters the course, we can see, by recreating the angle of the wheels, that the steering input to the left is 450 degrees, which translates to 1¼ full turns of the steering wheel. At the obstacle cone in the middle of the course, the trooper was turned back to center and then an additional 540 degrees to the right. That translates to 990 degrees of total right steering input, or 2¾ turns of the steering wheel. This analysis shows that there was a significant difference in the steering input applied to the trooper as compared to the other vehicles tested. Next, the independent engineers at Car Engineering analyzed the path along which each vehicle was driven through the course, again, to evaluate the driving consistency between vehicles. First, the trooper was compared to the forerunner. At the entrance of the course, the vehicles are lined up differently in relation to the left cone. Where the forerunner hits the left cone, the trooper doesn't touch it. This test is analogous to a slalom skier racing downhill between the gates. The key to having the best run is to eclipse the gates as close as possible. Similarly, the closer the vehicle is to the cones, the straighter the course becomes, making it easier to negotiate it successfully. At the midpoint of the course, however, the trooper is wide of the right cone where the forerunner is very close to it. This comparison was also done with the Chevy Tahoe. Again, the Tahoe is closer to the left cone on the first turn and also tighter to the right cone on the second turn. Finally, The comparison was done with the Nissan Pathfinder. Once again, the Pathfinder is closer to the left cone on entering the course, and also closer to the right cone at the midpoint of the course. This shows that the Trooper was driven differently through the same course compared with the other three vehicles tested. In 1992, Consumers Union described this short course test in its magazine. In order to determine whether this type of test should be added to their already extensive testing regimen, the Isuzu engineers recreated the test in 1993 and ran the prototype of the 1995 Trooper through the course. The vehicle passed without difficulty. Isuzu's engineers concluded, however, that the Consumers Union test was unreliable because it is too easy for the driver of the vehicle to knowingly or unknowingly influence the outcome of the test by the way he chooses to drive the vehicle through the test course. In 1988, the federal government, specifically the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, also concluded that this test was not reliable because it did not relate to real-world accident avoidance maneuvers, and the test could be manipulated by the driver. There appears to have been sufficient latitude to allow a driver, either knowingly or unknowingly, to influence the testing without readily being detected by the available instrumentation. The test procedures do not have a scientific basis and cannot be linked to real-world crash avoidance needs or actual crash data. Using the same procedures, probably any light utility vehicle could be made to roll over under the right conditions and driver input. Since the outcome of the test is overly dependent on the driver's input on the vehicle, this test has been rejected by the federal government, the British government, and Isuzu's engineers as unreliable. Recognizing that the Trooper was driven differently through the course is key to understanding why the Trooper handled the way it did.
So the 95 and 96 models were implicated by Consumer Reports, and by 2002, Isuzu decided to leave the U.S. market for passenger vehicles. They still make trucks, and the trucks are reliable. And if the Trooper here, 26 years old and still going strong, is any indication of how reliable a vehicle this was, then not only did Isuzu lose out by caving into Consumer Reports, but they also lost a good U.S. market. Now, Troopers are seen all over the world. They weren't just in the U.S., and the rest of the world didn't buy into the Consumer Reports thing, so they were still making Troopers as late as 2005 in other parts of the world. After this, Isuzu sued Consumer Reports for $244 million, which was predicted to be their loss of sales due to their bogus report. And an interesting thing came out of that in court. Number one, out of the several charges that Isuzu claimed, 6 of them were validated, and most of those surrounded the fact that the Consumer Reports test was flawed. This was coupled with the fact that the National Transportation Board looked at the Consumer Reports data as well as the data from the engineering company that Isuzu had hired, and they decided that there was no problem and no need for recalls. And that's why the vehicle was never officially put on the recall list for rollover possibility. But then the judge and the jury decided that for the other claims of Isuzu of false advertising and damaging the reputation of the Trooper, they decided a technicality that Consumer Reports, even though their method of testing for rollover was flawed and nobody bought into it in the US or in Europe, that Consumer Reports believed that their testing technique and outcomes were true. And since they believed that, there was no malignant intent to destroy the Isuzu Trooper, and they were simply reporting what they found under freedom of speech. So basically what this says is that the Isuzu Trooper was deemed to be unsafe in terms of rollover based on flawed tests, but because the testing people felt that they were really doing a public service when they published their results, that they did not mean intentionally to harm the Isuzu Trooper. You figure that out on your own time.